رحم الله من يقرأ سورة الفاتحة مسبوقة بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبه نستعين إنه خير ناصر ومعين. ثم الصلاة والسلام التحية والإكرام على سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين وعلى 9 المعصومين من ذرية الحسين، سيما إمامنا وصاحبنا بقية الله في الأرضين، واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد روي عن الإمام زين العابدين علي بن الحسين عليهما السلام.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أنه قال: اللهم صل على محمد وآله ولا ترفعني في الناس درجة إلا حطتني عند نفسي مثلها، ولا تحدث لي عزا ظاهرا إلا أحدثت لي ذلة باطنة عند نفسي بقدرها. Dear brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. On this night of Muharram, we have arrived upon the 8th night of our commemoration of the tragedy of Imam Hussein. And we have been so far in these few nights have been contemplating on this dua of Imam Zain al-Abidin called Dua Makarim al-Akhlaq, and have been trying to think about and understand, and as well, inshallah, with the tawfiq of Allah, apply the lessons that we learn from this dua and the reflection of these Makarim al-Akhlaq in the life and the tragedy of Imam Hussein. So far in our discussion, we have talked about many of the foundations upon which we have to build our virtues, ourselves, and our souls. And we have also talked about some of those particular virtues that Allah would love to see in us and we have to cultivate in ourselves. A few nights ago, mentioned that the Imam declares that the mu'mineen have a right and they also have a responsibility. The Imam asks Allah to give us honor and dignity. So far in our discussion, in our commentary and reflection on the dua, we have been talking about ourselves as individuals. What are those virtues that we have to find within ourselves with relation to ourselves and with relation to God? But the Imam, he mentions here, as well as in other places of this dua, that there are certain responsibilities that we have towards other people. Akhlaq, in the end of the day, has certain effects, and those effects, many of them, are in terms of our responsibilities and our interactions with others. In other words, how do we create a society that is in line with those values and those virtues that Allah has determined? What are those priorities and values that Allah has determined are more important than others? There are certain broad and universal values. Last night we said that Allah gives a certain dignity and a certain respect to all of His creation, whether they are the smallest animals and even inanimate objects, things that don't have life, to insan and human beings, all the way up to insan and human beings. All levels of Allah's creation has a certain level, basic level of dignity and respect and nobility, because it is connected back to Allah. Because there is an imprint of Allah on that creation. It is a sign of God, and it reflects God's beauty and grandeur. And so every single creature on this planet, and in fact in Allah's creation in its entirety, has a certain level of dignity, and we have a responsibility towards it. But as we said many days ago now, that Allah, when He explains His creation in the Quran, He explains it in terms of two levels. There is one level which is this world of material and the physical, and then Allah describes for us a higher realm, a moral and a spiritual world that Allah has created. And Allah gives priority to this moral and spiritual world. And Allah says that this moral and spiritual world is not one that is horizontal. The moral and spiritual world is one which has a hierarchy. And this hierarchy in Allah's creation is reflected in this physical world. And so we have a certain set of values that Allah has placed within human society. And these values are not all the same. Yes, it's true that we have to respect and give dignity to all of Allah's creation, but Allah has given priority to certain parts of His creation over others. Yes, human beings have a basic level of dignity and respect. But there are certain humans in our society that we have to prioritize and give more dignity and respect to. We have to be careful about our interactions with these particular groups and categories of people. And there is this insistence within both the Quran and the Ahadith that not all human beings are created equal. Not all human beings are equal. In fact, there is a phrase in the Quran which Allah uses to refer to this. All people have a certain basic level of respect, yes, but not all people deserve the same amount of respect.
Bismillah.
And so, let's look at this these phrases of Imam Zayn al-Abidin. Imam Zayn al-Abidin says, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa alih. And then he says, وَلَا تَرْفَعْنِي فِي النَّاسِ دَرَجَةً إِلَّا خَطَبْتَنِي عِنْدَ نَفْسِي مِثْلَهَا. The Imam says, O Allah, do not raise me up in rank except that you lower me with myself in that same amount. Allah gives us a certain rank among human beings within society and with respect to other people. And then the Imam says, in that same amount of respect and rank that you give me, that same amount of nobility, O Allah, bring me down within myself. Then the Imam says, وَلَا تُحْدِثْ لِي عِزًّا ظَاهِرًا. And do not bring me any outward exaltation, any outward praise, except إِلَّا أَحْدَثْتَ لِي ذِلَّةً بَاطِنَةً عِنْدَ نَفْسِي بِقَدْرِهَا. Do not give me any certain level of exaltation, except you bring me down within myself, inwardly, in that same degree, and in that same amount. The Imam, what's interesting in the phrase of the Imam is that the Imam says, in the same amount, neither more nor less. Right? The words of the Imams are very precise. If he brings us up in rank, say for example, Allah gives us a certain level of praise, a certain badge of honor within human society. And then He brings us only a little bit within ourselves. Then that might cause us to have a certain level of pride and vanity. But if He brings us too far down within ourselves, if He makes us feel a sense of shame, then maybe we won't be able to hold our head up high within society either. Right? For those people who have such little amount of self-confidence and self-respect, a lot of times that lack of self-confidence and self-respect seeps into their social interactions. And so the Imam says, bring me down in that same amount within myself, inwardly, as you bring me up and you exalt me within society. The Imam is trying to teach us that our existence in this world has multiple different levels, has multiple different layers. And we have a responsibility to ourselves just as we have a responsibility towards society. And our responsibility towards ourselves and to God sometimes is different than our responsibility towards others and our rights with respect to others. And so we have to figure out what are those values that Islam sets within society. Who should we praise? Who should we exalt within society? What characteristics should we find in another human being which sets them apart from other people? And for this, we can look at the Quran. What are those categories of people that Allah sets apart from the rest of His creation? The first category we can see, again, the Quran says, La yastawi. The Quran gives us two categories of people, and Allah says, these two are not equal. Multiple times in the Quran it mentions this. The Quran says, لا يستوي القاعدون من المؤمنين غير أولي الضرر والمجاهدون في سبيل الله بأموالهم وأنفسهم. Allah says, there is one category of people, there is one value and one virtue within human society that sets a category of people aside and gives them a higher rank within our society. The Quran says, those who sit and sit out among the mu'mineen who do not have a weakness within themselves are not equal to those who fight and strive in the path of Allah through their wealth and through themselves. Right? Those who strive and struggle and fight in the path of Allah, these people who do this striving and give this effort, their entire effort in the path of Allah, these people, not only in themselves and not only in their wealth, but in their entire being, these people are set apart. They have a higher rank within Islamic society than other people. لا يستوي القاعدون من المؤمنين غير أولي الضرر والمجاهدون في سبيل الله. So those who go out and fight in the path of Allah, who struggle and strive in the path of Allah, these people, they are set apart. Now, a lot of times the Quran will talk about fighting and, talk about warfare and so on. But warfare is one type of struggle, right? Warfare is one type of striving in the path of Allah. And we have in the ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt that even in our own time, this time that a lot of us don't have the responsibility of going out and fighting in war and so on, this jihad, this struggle and this striving and this efforts that we put, this is also falls under this concept of jihad. بِأَمْوَالِهِمْ وَأَنفُسِهِمْ. So Allah says, not just in their wealth, but in themselves. In their selves. They give their entire being in the path of Allah. So that's one category of people. One value we have in society, in Islamic society, is that those who give their whole selves in the path of Allah. Another value that we have in Islamic society is mentioned in Surah Al-Hadid. Inshallah, we can recite this ayah after a loud salawat. In Surah Al-Hadid, Allah expands on this. Again, as we mentioned before, the Quran sometimes gives us a certain concept in a general form, and then in other parts of the Quran, Allah explains that concept in more detail. And He gives us a depth that He didn't give us initially. And so, in Surah Al-Hadid, Allah says, لا يستوي من أنفق من قبل الفتح وقاتل. So, within Islamic history, we know that there was a conquest of Mecca. After the Prophet was migrated to Medina, there were a number of wars that took place, a number of battles that took place between the Prophet and the Mushrikeen. And then at one point within the Prophet's history, the Prophet was able to conquer Mecca. And it is said that the conquest of Mecca occurred without any bloodshed. But before the conquest of Mecca, the state and the situation of the Muslims was very perilous. It was very unsure and uncertain. The Muslims were constantly under attack. They were constantly under siege and in both economic, financial, and cultural embargo. So nobody would interact with the Muslims. Nobody was willing to trade with the Muslims. So it was a very difficult moment in Muslim history. After the conquest of Mecca, once the Prophet was able to conquer and defeat his arch enemies, right, the strongest enemies and the pillars of the Prophet's enemies, which was based in Mecca, then the Muslims were, had a sense of dignity and had a sense of respect within the Arabian Peninsula, within the Arabs, among the Arabs. And so, life became very easy. And we would see that tribes and tribes of people would come and join Islam. Now that Islam has this honor and this prestige within Arabian society, then tribes would come and join the Prophet's message and his religion. And the Quran says, those who strove in Allah's path and who gave their full effort and fought in the path of Allah before the conquest of Mecca, before this moment in Islamic history, when life was very difficult, those people are better, in a sense, are given priority, in a sense, that is a value over those who strove after the conquest, when life was easy. In other words, when life is hard and you give in the path of Allah, whether in your amwal or in your anfus, whether in your finances, in your wealth, or in yourselves, that is better than when you give in times of goodness and in times of ease. And so, Quran teaches us that we shouldn't always just give when we have. We should sometimes give when we don't have, when we are in a state of weakness, when we are in a state of difficulty. Then Allah, He says, He gives us one of the highest values within Islamic society, and that is ilm, knowledge. Allah in Surah Al-Zumar says, هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون إنما يتذكر أولو الألباب. Are those who know among the Muslims, among the mu'mins, are those who know within society equal to those who don't know? So, and we see in Islamic history and in Islamic society that knowledge is given a certain level of priority beyond other values and virtues that we find within Islamic society. Beyond even fighting in the path of Allah. Beyond even giving our wealth and being charitable in the path of Allah. In fact, knowledge is that singular thing within the ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt that sets apart a mu'min beyond others. It is unique. In fact, we have ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt, in particular from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, where the Imam says, a person who knows is better than 70,000 abid or abd. A person who knows and a scholar or a knowledgeable person is better than 70,000 worshippers. And what that means is, a person who knows and has knowledge, he's better than people who act and people who do worship. Right? People who just have their entire value in terms of acting and worshipping in the path of Allah, whatever that worship might be. Whether it's salat, whether it's charity, whatever it might be, these people, these scholars within Islamic society, these are given a certain level of priority because of their knowledge. And that is why we see that Islamic society, within Islamic history, knowledge was given the highest priority, and people would send their children to learn knowledge. And so we see that the sciences and all of the different fields, many of the different disciplines that we have, were developed and furthered within Islamic history and in Islamic civilization because of this prioritization of knowledge. So in Islamic society, just to summarize, we have certain values. First is fighting and struggling in the path of Allah, both in terms of our wealth and in terms of ourselves. Second is not just doing this fighting in times of goodness and in times of ease, but in times of difficulty as well. Third is doing this goodness and acting in the path of Allah before others. So this notion of those who are prioritized and given value and virtue before the conquest of Mecca is actually talked about in other parts of the Quran as well. just as a side note, there is a ayah of the Quran, Surah At-Tawbah, ayah number 100, where, and this is a kind of a point of sort of debate among a lot of Muslim mufassirun, where the Quran, it seems, it prioritizes particular companions of the Prophet over others. And so in Surah At-Tawbah, Allah says, وَالسَّابِقُونَ الْأَوَّلُونَ مِنَ الْمُهَاجِرِينَ وَالْأَنصَارِ وَالَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُم. Those who are given priority, rather, those who are come first, as-sabiqun, al-awwalun, those who come first, min al-muhajirin wal-ansar, from the muhajirs, from those who migrated with the Prophet, wal-ansar, and those who were within Medina, and those who followed them. And a lot of times this is used to say that the muhajirin and the ansar who came first, because of them coming first, because of them coming earlier on in Islamic history, they are better than other people, than those who maybe were born later, or who accepted Islam later, or who heard even the message of Islam later. But what Allah is trying to show us in this ayah, as well as in other ayats of the Quran, is that don't think, yes, we set up this prioritization and this hierarchy within Islamic society. But don't think, just because you fall within a particular category or a particular group, that just because you fall in that particular group, Allah is going to give you a certain level of dignity above others. We're not talking about identity here. We're not talking about one group versus another. We're talking about those who prioritize Allah over others. Those who have these actions and who insist upon these actions. And so when we look in other ayat of the Quran, Allah describes what it means for you to be as-sabiqun, al-awwalun. As-sabiqun isn't just because you heard the message of Islam first, or you accepted Islam first, whatever the reason might be. Maybe you saw some wealth in this message of the Prophet. Maybe you saw some power and the ability for you to control others within the message of Islam, and therefore you accepted Islam first. That's not what the Quran is saying. If you look in the other ayat of the Quran, Allah describes for us what as-sabiqun is. In Surah Al-Waqi'ah, Allah describes for us three categories of people. As-sabiqun, as-sabiqun, Allah says. Those who come first. Now, what does it mean for someone to come first? Allah doesn't say, again, it's not those who accept necessarily Islam first, but rather those who stick to the lessons and the teachings of Islam, and who prioritize those teachings above all other things, in the beginning of their life until the very end. Not just because they are young and they are, say for example, rebellious, but rather because they see something deep and profound within the message of Islam, and they're able to transform themselves according to that message. And so in another ayah of the Quran, we have one ayah in Surah Al-Waqi'ah where Allah describes for us how as-sabiqun are treated in the heavens. And they are in fact separated from the regular mu'minun, those other inhabitants of the heavens, of Allah's paradise. In another ayah of the Quran, Allah describes for us sabiquna bil khayrat, those who rush and come hastily towards khayrat, who come hastily towards goodness and doing good within society and for Allah. This is what sabiqun means. This is what it means to prioritize Allah over all other things. السابقون بالخيرات بإذن الله ذلك هو الفضل الكبير. Those who come first بالخيرات, towards goodness, with the permission of Allah, that is a great value and virtue. ذلك هو الفضل الكبير. Now, if we're trying to understand what it means for all of these different values to be found in a single person. What is it that we said that on one level you have those who fight and strive in the path of Allah in terms of their money, in terms of the blessings that Allah has given them, and in terms of themselves. That's one level of values which we have within Islamic society. Another value we have those who rush towards goodness, and those who do this in times of both wealth and in times of difficulty. In times of goodness and in times of difficulty. And then Allah sets up a second and a higher level of value and priority, which is knowledge. So not just amal, but ilm. Not just actions, but knowledge. And then Allah says, that final highest point within Islamic society is al-muttaqun. Inna akramakum indallah atqakum. Those who have taqwa. Those, in other words, who use their actions as well as their knowledge to gain closeness towards Allah. Those who use their actions and their knowledge to come and become fearful and conscious of Allah. To have taqwa. Al-muttaqun. Inna akramakum indallah atqakum. And therefore we find other ayat in the Quran where Allah describes for us using the same phrase. قُلْ لَا يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ الْأَعْمَى وَالْبَصَرُ or al-a'ma wal-basar. Those who don't say that those who can see are equal to those who cannot see. In fact, when we look in the Quran, Allah, when He talks about sight, sight is just a symptom of the heart. For those, when the Quran talks about those who have insight, this is a metaphor and a symbol for something higher. Those who can see into Allah's creation. And this sight is a result and an effect of a person who has an open heart, who has turned their direction towards Allah, who is conscious and muttaqi of Allah. And so, the highest level within Islamic society is al-muttaqin. Now again, we're not talking about something theoretical. We're trying to see how this applies to our lives. And for us to see how this applies to our lives, we have to look at what is it and who is it that the Quran is talking about. We've mentioned a number of different ayat, a number of different levels of Islamic society. We have to see, well, what is the example that Allah has set for us within Islamic history for these ranks. And when we look in Islamic history, if we want to find a model for ourselves, who do we look at? In fact, if we look at each individual one of these verses and each individual one of these virtues, we find their perfection and their completion in the person of Amir al-Mu'mineen. If we want to understand what does it mean for someone to give themselves and their wealth in the path of Allah, what does that mean? For them to strive and struggle and fight in the path of Allah. In those moments of difficulty and in those moments of goodness. When we look at battle after battle, from the very beginning of Islam, from the very beginning of Islamic history until the very end of the Prophet's lifetime and even beyond, who was it that was the hero of every battle?
Right?
Who was it that on the Battle of Khandaq, in this moment when the Muslims were being attacked in their very homeland, right? When nobody else was standing up, none of the other companions were standing up to protect the dignity and the honor of Islam. Who was it that when he stood up and when he came to fight against the enemy of Islam, he rose up with a courage and a dignity, and he struck down the enemies of Islam such that the Prophet of Allah said, This is Iman in its entirety, coming up against Kufr in its entirety.
نعرة حيدري.
Imam Ali was the one who was first in each and every battle, was willing to give his entire life and all that he had. And that is the model and the role model that we have to set for ourselves. In terms of ilm, right, there's no one who really stands up, other than the Prophet of Islam, there's no one who really stands up to Amir al-Mu'mineen, who can really compare to Amir al-Mu'mineen. And this is one thing that sets apart the school of the Ahlul Bayt, that we pride ourselves in knowledge because Amir al-Mu'mineen was the person who had knowledge and who emphasized knowledge when no one else was.
Subhanallah, subhanallah.
Amir al-Mu'mineen, there's a very famous hadith of Amir al-Mu'mineen where the Imam says, Saluni qabla an tafquduni. Ask me before you lose me. We know this phrase of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the sentence of Amir al-Mu'mineen, but what comes after that is even more interesting. Saluni qabla an tafquduni fa inni bi turuq as-sama'i adra minni bi turuq al-ard.
Subhanallah, subhanallah.
Ask me before you lose me, because I am more aware, I am more conscious and understand better the paths of the heavens more than I understand the paths of this world. Imagine a person who walks on this earth, Amir al-Mu'mineen, who knows every single part of this earth, he knows the heavens and Allah's higher realms more so than he knows this physical world. Inni بطرق السماء أدرى مني بطرق الأرض. I am more aware of those higher realms, of those ultimate priorities and creation of Allah than this world. So if we're looking for fighting and striving in the path of Allah, then we look at Amir al-Mu'mineen. If we're looking at ilm and knowledge and scholarship, then we look at Amir al-Mu'mineen. What about taqwa? Famously, Amir al-Mu'mineen, it is said, other than within the school of the Ahlul Bayt, the praise that is given to Amir al-Mu'mineen is used in this phrase, Karram Allah wajha. May Allah dignify and honor his face. Right? Why is it that Amir al-Mu'mineen is actually separated from all other companions of the Prophet with this praise? Because Amir al-Mu'mineen was one of the only companions of the Prophet who never did any level of shirk for Allah, of Allah. لا يشرك بالله طرفة عين. He did not do shirk of Allah even with the blinking of an eye. And we talked about it earlier, brothers and sisters. We talked about what the Quran defines as shirk. It's not. Shirk in the definition of the Quran is not just polytheism. It's not just idol worship. Shirk, in fact, in its most purest essence, is that sense of neglect and negligence that we have towards Allah. It's having a sense of turning our direction away from Allah. And this is what Amir al-Mu'mineen is defined as. A person who was never negligent of Allah. And so Amir al-Mu'mineen says, ما رأيت شيئا إلا ورأيت الله قبله وبعده وفيه. I did not see anything in this world except that I saw before it, after it, and within it, and alongside of it, Allah.
نعرة حيدري. يا علي يا علي يا علي مدد حق حيدر.
If we're talking, صلوا على محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
If we're talking about taqwa, that highest level of Islamic virtues and values within Islamic society, then we can take as our model and as our example Amir al-Mu'mineen. Now again, this is not just because we are the followers of the school of the Ahlul Bayt. any individual within Islamic society and without Islamic society, anyone who wants to benefit from the teachings of Islam, they have to have models for what path they have to take. Any individual who wants to learn a new skill has to have a teacher, has to have someone who will take their hand and guide them. Otherwise, one of the biggest difficulties that we have when we're learning a new skill is how do we adjust when something happens, right? How do we, for example, in our particular society, how do we, if there are two conflicting things, there are two conflicting priorities, which priority do we prioritize? Which value do we prioritize? Right? On the one hand, you have those who work and give this amal and this worship. On the other hand, you have those who are scholarly and invest and sacrifice their time for knowledge. Which one of these do we prioritize? Do we give more respect to those who are worshippers or to those who are scholarly and knowledgeable? When these two come in conflict, and as a human society, we have limited resources. And so we have to figure out and we have to see an example of what it means for a person to live out these virtues. And once we see that example, then we can really understand what does it mean for someone to prioritize God and have taqwa in Allah and give priority to Allah over all other things. What does it mean when Amirul Mu'mineen, in the heat of battle, when someone comes and asks him a question, Amirul Mu'mineen says, because this question is about Allah, even in the heat of battle, I am going to respond to this person's question because that is what we're fighting for. So he gives priority to knowledge and seeking Allah over and beyond power and strength. That is what it means for us to have a model and an example. And so that is why we look at Amirul Mu'mineen. That is why we look at the Ahlul Bayt. Not, again, just because we are followers of the school of the Ahlul Bayt. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alihi. And so if we are trying to find examples of virtue and piety within our society, we can look at Amirul Mu'mineen. We see that Amirul Mu'mineen is the person who describes himself in terms of the akhlaq of the Prophet. He says, I am the person who would follow in the steps and the footsteps of the Prophet like a young camel, a baby camel follows in the footsteps of his mother. Of a young boy or a young infant following his mother. Amirul Mu'mineen is that person who connects himself most closely with the Prophet. But the blessings of Allah, the examples that Allah sets within our lives do not just end with Amirul Mu'mineen. Even after Amirul Mu'mineen, we have examples of people who resembled the Prophet more than any other person, khalqan wa khulqan. It is said that on the day of Ashura, when Imam Hussein had sent out all of his companions, the first among the Ahlul Bayt to sacrifice himself and for the Imam to give permission for him to fight was Ali al-Akbar, the oldest son of Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein, maybe the reason why he sent Ali al-Akbar is to say that, O Ahlul Bayt, don't think that I am going to prioritize my son over you. That I am going to leave him until the very end. I'm going to set him out so that you can see the example of what it means to sacrifice. Maybe it was to show the enemies one last source of guidance. Give them one last lesson. That if you are fighting me, look at Ali. Look at Ali and see the face of the Prophet of Islam. It is said that when Imam Hussein sent out Ali al-Akbar, he called out to God. He said, "Oh Allah, you bear witness that I am sending out a person who is the closest to the Prophet, the closest to your messenger, khalqan wa khulqan, both in his appearance and in his actions." If we want to remember the Prophet, if we want to have a memory of the Prophet, you will look at Ali al-Akbar. It is said that whenever Imam Hussein and the companions would miss the Prophet, they would look at Ali al-Akbar. And so Imam Hussein is showing strength when he sends out his son. He loved Ali al-Akbar. It's said that he sends Ali al-Akbar out into the battlefield and he shows his strength. And yet when Ali al-Akbar begins coming into the battlefield, it is said that Imam Hussein walks behind him and follows him. And then the battle ensues, and Ali al-Akbar begins to fight the enemy. In the end of the day, this is the grandson of Amirul Mu'mineen, that most valiant and courageous warrior in every single battle. And so Ali fights a valiant battle, and he cuts down many of the enemy soldiers. And then after a while, Ali comes back towards the tent. Maybe he missed his father. Maybe he had gotten so weak that he knew this was the final moments that he could see his father. And so he wanted to say his final farewell. And he looks to his father, he comes back to the tent, and he looks to his father and he says, "Ya Abba, oh my father, the thirst is killing me. The iron of my sword is weighing me down. Is there just a drop of water that you can give to me? Is there a drop that I can quench my thirst so that I can go back out into the battle and fight for you yet again?" And the Imam responds to him and he says, "Ya Ali, don't worry. These are only the final moments. There are only a few more moments left. And insha'Allah, your grandfather will quench your thirst." And so Imam Hussein sends off his son into the heat of battle. And Imam Hussein sees his son fighting valiantly until finally one of the enemy soldiers comes up from behind and he hits Ali al-Akbar and he falls to the ground. And it is said that before Imam Hussein could get to Ali al-Akbar, his body was trampled under the horse's feet. And so Ali shouts out, "Oh my father, I see my grandfather, and he is coming to me and he is quenching my thirst. Oh my father, this is my final farewell. Oh my father, inshallah I will see you soon. Oh my father, my grandfather is telling me that you will join us soon." And so it is reported that once Imam Hussein got to the body of Ali al-Akbar, it was so damaged and so injured that it was difficult for Imam Hussein to pick up his body. Or maybe it was because he saw his son in such a state that he could not help him anymore. And so he calls out to the camp. This was Imam Hussein, the strongest man in his army. And yet when he comes to the body of his son, he calls out to his camp, "Come and take your brother. I cannot lift him myself." I'm sure Ali al-Akbar's body was not too heavy for Imam Hussein, and yet he could not lift his son's body. And so he calls out, come and help your brother and lift his body back to the camp. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون.